before you came along.
The 50s was a particular time, and countries like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico organized a system of cooperation, and Colombia was one of the leaders, and we opened an office in New York, and they discovered that the coffee consumer didn't know anything about coffee. Where does it come from? How is it grown? Who does it? That's why we created in Colombia the image of Juan Valdez, the name of the typical coffee grower that used to come with his mule and the 2 bags of coffee.
One day in Colombia, South America, Juan Valdez took his coffee to market. He had grown the beans in rich mound soil. He had shaded them so they would ripen slowly. In the market were 2 American coffee buyers. They bought for brands that used only Colombian beans.
6 months after this campaign started, coffee consumption went up. There was a contact, an awareness with the coffee grower.
This pleased Juan.
At that time, a Pan-American Bureau to promote coffee was created with the contribution of the United States and Canada and the coffee-producing countries of the area. The coffee break was originated there.
The Pan American Coffee Bureau launches a media campaign and introduces the term coffee break into the North American vocabulary.
Time up for a coffee break.
Would you like a better cup of coffee for your coffee break?
The coffee break is a deliberate attempt to increase consumption, but the strategy does not reduce the oversupply of coffee. In Brazil, once again, the glut causes prices to collapse amidst cries for President Vargas's impeachment. Vargas responds in an open letter to the nation. After decades of domination by international economic groups, I put myself at the head of a revolution and won. Then came the coffee crisis, and the value of our main product rose. We tried to defend the higher coffee price, but the response was so violent we were forced to give in. I have nothing more to give you now, except my blood. Putting down his pen, Brazil's longtime dictator shoots himself through the heart. Vargas's suicide undermines the already fragile social order in Latin America, leading to a period of Cold War instability.
A communist-influenced government ruled Guatemala from 1945 until this summer, when exiled Guatemalans came back with guns. This was revolution. The anti-communist rebels invaded from neighboring Honduras.
In Guatemala, President Jacobo Arbenz's land reforms are affecting the privileges of the coffee elite and foreign enterprises. Fearing a communist takeover, the CIA sponsors an invasion. It's a disaster for the country. The new president annuls the reforms, and years of oppression and bloodshed follow.
2,000 miles away, the United Nations met an extraordinary Sunday session. Russian delegate Serapkin got Lodge's blunt warning.
Representative of the Soviet Union, stay out of this hemisphere. And don't try to start your plans and your conspiracies over here.
Despite the U.S. warning, Cold War tensions only escalate. From the coffee fields of Latin America to the rice paddies of Southeast Asia, the U.S. engages in an anti-communist campaign culminating in the Vietnam War. Faced with a threatening adversary, the U.S. is prepared to make a new alliance.
In 1962, finally, the United States entered what was known as the International Coffee Agreement. They weren't afraid of Nazis anymore, but they were afraid of communists. They felt that if the price of coffee went too low, there would be revolution all throughout Latin America. So they were willing to enter this sort of OPEC agreement for coffee called the ICA, the International Coffee Agreement.
The coffee agreement was the result of a political agreement. adopted at the highest level to create better trade conditions for the commodities that were produced by more than 50 or 60 developing countries around the world. And there were different approaches. For coffee, it was the quota system.
Under the quota system, producing countries agree to limit the amount of coffee they export, and consuming countries agree to limit what they import. Despite constant battles over quotas, the system works. Coffee growers enjoy the longest period of relative stability they have ever known. But like most price control schemes, the agreement is subject to political and economic pressures.
Nobody was ever very happy with this agreement. It involved all the consuming countries, well, except Russia never joined it. And it involved all of the producing countries, all of whom were jealous of each other. There was a constant fight as to what the quota should be. In 1989, the whole thing fell apart. Brazil wanted to back out of it for various reasons. The US wanted to back out of it because the Cold War was ending. The Cold War was over. The Berlin Wall had just fallen. There was all this coffee in reserve, and everybody rushed to dump it onto the world market before the price went too low. And of course, what that did was to drive the price ever lower. So the bottom dropped out of the market for years, below the cost of production.
The world's coffee giant is not about to take the low prices lying down. To Brazil's coffee industry, this means war.
Eu termino sempre com a frase do general de guerra chinês Sun Tzu, que dizia que na paz, prepare-se para a guerra, e na guerra, prepare-se para a paz. E eu termino dando um enfoque, o que isso representa dentro do mercado de uma commodity como o café. O produtor, durante os preços baixos, ele tem que se preparar para os preços altos. E durante os preços altos, ele tem que se preparar para os preços baixos. Que esses ciclos são inevitáveis.
Brazil prepares for the next bust in the cycle with a huge investment in farming technology. Massive new machines replace human labor, so producers make a profit even when prices drop fairly low.
A Ipanema preocupa com a mecanização do café. A Ipanema tem 11 milhões de pés de café e a produção para o ano que vem está estimada em 125 mil sacas. Mais de 50% do seu café mecanicamente, implementando quando elas são de bom aproveito para a empresa.
A partir daí, novas tecnologias, ela veio para viabilizar grandes empresas investindo no plantio de café. Agora, em termos de qualidade, o produtor brasileiro ainda deixa a desejar.
As the quality of Brazil's industrial crop is dropping, the multinational corporations are getting their coffee cheap. They are the winners when Brazil's production hits a record 50 million bags. But the real corporate windfall comes when a war-weary, tea-drinking nation bursts onto the coffee market. In just a decade, Vietnam's production swells by over 1,000%.
Vietnam became the second largest coffee-producing country in the world. And the coffee they're producing is primarily Robusta, which is a low-quality coffee in the first place, but it's also, they're producing bad Robusta. Well, what's happened is they've flooded the world with bad coffee, and that's the real reason for this coffee crisis. Now, Brazil is also growing way too much Robusta. It's not just Vietnam. But there's no question that this is all tied in together. You say the word Vietnam to a coffee grower in Guatemala, and they will, make the sign of the cross and spit at you because, they blame the Vietnamese for the current coffee crisis and for the fact that they can't make a living.
After a century of boom and bust, the world's worst commodity downturn becomes a full-blown global crisis. The effects are nowhere greater than in the coffee-growing regions of Central America. Here, entire communities are dislocated, and families have little access to the basic necessities of life.
Pues lo que es la crisis de café es una pobreza que existe entre la familia, entre ambos, pues esposo y hijos, porque sabemos que de la crisis del café sufren los niños, lo de que es la salud, lo que es el vestuario y el estudio.
Nosotros los pobres de Guatemala ya no podemos conseguir trabajo porque del café vivíamos, porque no hay trabajo aquí, tenemos que emigrar, unos al departamento, otros a la capital, otros intentando a Estados Unidos, donde lamentablemente algunos logran sus objetivos y otros encuentran la muerte.
Él es Jesús López Ramos, él es originario del estado de Jalisco y el estado de...
The crisis captures the world's attention when 14 Mexican coffee farmers, searching for a way to feed their families, die crossing the Arizona desert.
Yo para mí, mi hermano mayor era lo máximo, porque siempre se enfermaba mi papá y mi mamá y siempre corría yo con él por ser el mayor.
At the turn of the 21st century, many of the people who produce our coffee are only marginally better off than their enslaved ancestors. The wild cycles that led to the latest crisis will certainly continue until governments and the big coffee corporations help end the chaos in the coffee market. Even at the best of times, it would cost most coffee farmers a full day's wages to buy the frothy cappuccino consumers enjoy daily in their local coffee house. But ironically, it is this new generation of coffee lovers who could be Latin America's best hope. The dissidents who emerge from the Vietnam War develop a taste for good coffee and a growing consciousness of the world around them. They begin to ask not only for a better cup of coffee, but where their coffee is coming from and at what human price.